Hello, bruv. I've got another classic. Well, I don't know about another classic. I've also got a code, so I sound like a dying bear. Alright, this book, I believe, was published in 1897, but this edition says 1900. It purports to be an authoritative system of cartomancy with a prefatory notice by Irenaeus Stevenson. As you can see, the goddamn page just fell out. And this is why I didn't want to handle the book, but eventually you got to handle it, bruv. (1896) by Harper. To John Davis Adams, this new fourth setting of an old mystery is cordially offered. If any other pages start falling, I'm quitting. Anyways, this book's a literary hoax, as you'll see in the preface. Stevenson, who was later known for writing the first gay novel, apparently, called Imre, I believe it was, in 1906, wrote this book. I'm not sure if he wrote it as a spoof or purports to be a repurposing of an old book that he found in some shop or something. Anyway. Editorial preface. 'Tis as easy as lying. Well, there you go. That's all you need to know. Hamlet. It is safe to presume that even the most inquisitive book hunters of the present day and few of the fellowship during 2 or 3 generations past have encountered the scarce and curious little volume here presented. As in a friendly literary resurrection, Robert Antrobus's The Square of Sevens and the Parallelogram. Its mathematical title hardly hints at the amusement that the book affords. With its solemn faith in the gravity of its mysteries, with its uncertain spellings, and capitalizing such as belong to even the 18th century's early part. Is that the right page? Early part, with its quaint phrases and sly observations, all the time sticking strictly close to business. It has a literary character as well as one occult that is quite its own. Fortune-telling with cards and belief in fortune-telling with cards, like 100 greater and lesser follies in the mind, were straws floating around the current of British life, intellectual and social, during the reign of George II. This was the case in spite of the enlightening influences of religion, science, and philosophy. Modish society was addicted to matters over which argument was hardly worthwhile. In which respect we find modish society the same in all epochs. Our addresses, particularly, were often charming women, and almost as often sensible women. But like the men of Athens, they were too superstitious. Often were they such in a fond and amusing degree. Lady Betty or Lady Selina, for that matter, even Sir Tomkin and my Lord Puce, might be spirited men and women of the world, but they did not repudiate the idea of ghosts. They abhorred a mare's breakage. They disliked the Friday's errand. They shuddered over a 7-time sneeze or at a howling dog at midnight. And the gentle sex especially would and did tell fortunes almost as zealously as play quadrille and piquet. Let us be courteous to them. Let us remember that esoteric Buddhism, faith healing, and psychic phenomena were not yet enjoying systematic cultivation and solemn propagandism, and that relatively few dying folk were allowed to go on with their dying as part of a process of healing which excludes medicine and insists on the conviction that the invalids are not ill. But to our square of sevens, with which even a Galileo may design to be diverted, especially if in using it, the air is found to be full of coincidences. The story of the book is already alluded to as odd. The inquisitive reader may be referred to certain copies only, therein inserted by afterthought on the author's part, and therefore in a more fraction and a mere fraction of whatever represented the extremely small edition of the work may be sought the prefatory explication made for the benefit of my friends male and female. In recounting the origin of the manual, its author is candid, but at the same time too long-winded for quoting entire. Enough to say, as the substitute for a lengthy tale of facts, that prior to the year 1731, the author of the Square of Sevens, Mr. Robert Antrobus, a gentleman of Bath, was called in the month of November to pass sundry months in Tretley, that antique but still lively little town of Cornwall. He describes himself as exceedingly vexed and inconvenienced by summons on my affairs connected with the parceling of a piece of property unexpectedly acquired. Mr. Antrobus, who, by the by, may perhaps be associated in the memories of readers of minor 18th century correspondence with such notables of the day as William Pitt, Dr. Johnson, Admiral Byng, Mark Akenside, William Pulteney, the Duke of Cumberland, and many others of the time, was a shy, silent man of wealth. Also was he one of considerable learning, out of the way and other, including an interest in gypsies and gypsy language remarkable for the period. I can't vouch for any of those. I have not heard any of those names prior to this reading. He lodged at the only inn of any suitability in the place. Thereby he made an unexpected acquaintance. Before a week had elapsed, he became much interested in the fact that under the same roof, but in more humble quarters than his own, was lying and dying another stranger in the place. This was a man of some 40 years, known only as Mr. George. His home is not a clear matter, nor that he had any relatives except a little girl of 6 or 7 years old, his child. It is likely that in alluding to him in the prefatory explication mentioned, Mr. Antrobus disguised what was already obscure, and that Mr. George, of the troublesome talk, don't want to rip the pages, of the inn people is an abbreviated pseudonym. Mr. Antrobus was a humane and benevolent man, as well as an inquisitive one. He delicately assisted to make the sick guest more comfortable in his wasting body. He won his confidence, genuinely compassionated his anxieties, and presently pledged himself to a most kindly office, the care and provision in future for the child soon to be fatherless. Long before this time, motherless. Whether she was motherless by the actual death of the parents or not, Mr. Antrobus did not learn, or does not tell. But he did learn by a confession that Mr. George was really George X, a gypsy, and one withal of unusual education and breeding. More remarkable still, he was a gypsy intensely embittered against the race from which he had lived for many years, wholly withdrawn. The cause of such sentiments and renegade existence good Mr. Antrobus tried in vain with much delicacy to discover. At the clearest it appeared to him to date from the dying man's marriage, and from some stormy period of his career. In any case, the renunciation of Mr. George, in lot and part in gypsydom, was of savage sincerity. He would not tolerate the idea of his child being left open to such influences, and as a matter of her happy fortune in meeting with our kind Bath antiquarian, she never encountered them. Recognizing in his benefactor not only a generous man, but one genuinely interested in the whole topic of gypsy life, character and affairs moderately studied at the time preceding a Barrow or a Leland, George X entertained Mr. Antrobus for hours and days in what must have been an extraordinarily free parliament. It discussed not merely the concerns in general, but the secrets of Egypt. Mr. George had traveled much. He had acquired a deal of special knowledge delightful to Antrobus. It is provoking that Antrobus did not commit more of it to paper. But among other matters, Mr. Antrobus was enlightened on the secrets of looking into Ducarapins in a degree of minuteness that few gorgios enjoy. As part of this last confidence, the rarest from one of the blood, did George X disclose in course of certain seances the square of sevens, that most particular and potent method of prying into the past and future, and prying into the past and present and future. It figures the wonderful parallelogram with its MasterCards, influences, and so on, which our book records. Moreover, George X declared that whereas most of his race can or will use only corrupted or quite frivolous versions of it, this statement set its real and rare set forth with the utmost purity, value, and completeness, in a degree known to only a few of the families of Egypt. As such a weighty bit of black art did Mr. Antrobus make its details into a book. As such he printed it. Doubtless he thought that a betrayed secret may lawfully be betrayed as fully as possible. Nevertheless, it was not so much of a re-betrayal. For less than what a publisher of this day would call one fair-sized edition of the Square of Sevens, printed for Antrobus by the great John Gown of the Mask Bookshop, as ever appeared, and to account for the semi-privacy surrounding the little work must be set forth the dolesome incident of a printing house fire burning all except about a dozen or so copies, before there had been any distribution of the book among the author's friends, male or female, or to the public. By some sudden change of his own mind or his conscience, Mr. Antrobus did not order any new edition. The prefatory afterthought mentioned may be found only if stuck in some of the copies of the volume, doubtless by quick and clumsy after-pastings. Why Antrobus did not give the volume real currency is not known. That he was urged to do so is certain. It is likely, however, that about the same time some pecuniary losses withheld him from such expensive hobbies as printing books. He returned to Bath and died there in 1740. We have no particulars of the event, nor are there more than allusions to it in the journals of the date or in the letters of contemporaries. Lady Lavinia Pitt, however, mentions the disease as the smallpox, then so much dreaded. He left no family except his young ward, the mysterious daughter of Mr. George of the Tratelli Inn. To her Antrobus had given his name, and she inherited half his estate. Shortly after her kind guardian's death, she married an Exeter gentleman of high family. Her father, Mr. George, died in the course of Mr. Antrobus's stay at Tratelli. To some bow and bells of the reigns of George II and George III, this book, originating in the conversation of another George, George the Unknown, could well seem an interesting matter. All the more might it be so in view of its scarceness from the first. There are no more copies of it, despite the fact that fashionable dilettanti in things occult have borne it in mind. Could anything be more characteristic of Horace Walpole than to find him in a letter from serene Strawberry Hill confessing to no purpose that he is desirous of getting hold of that damned queer old woman's fortune-telling book by Bob Antrobus? In the diary of the sprightly Louisa Josepha Adelaide, Countess of Bute, afterwards so unfortunate a wife and an even more unfortunate mother, she describes a droll scene at a Scotch castle one evening, in which the unexpected statements of the Square of Sevens as to the lives and characters of the company put to the blush several persons of a distinction who rashly tempted its wisdom, especially including the aged Earl of Lothian. For what Lady Morgan thought of it, and the characteristic story of the peculiar terms on which she offered to sell her copy to Archbishop Dacre, the reader is referred to the Bentejac correspondence. It is on its face a model method of fortune-telling with cards, easily the first for completeness and directness. Our author, in a letter to his cousin, Henry Antrobus, quotes the eminent Brow as styling it not only the most authoritative little book on its topic, certainly the most interesting one, but the only volume on the subject which is not a confusing and puerile farrago of nonsense, troublesome to look into and unsatisfactory to acquire. Certainly our ancient enthusiast record can be learned and used systematically, exactly as is the case with such excellent and approved systems of chiromancy as Mr. Heron, Allen's, and others. It may be thought fortunate for modern students of card divination that the work has survived so complete and clear. Its discreetness, too, is delightfully adroit. When it suggests that its tenses past, present, and future are not as definite as one might desire. There is no copy of the book in the British Museum, nor in the Paris Bibliothèque Nationale, nor in any public collection of America, England, or France that I can name. One worn but perfect manuscript copy is to be found in a private library in the United States. Another might yet be sought in far Australia, if still owned by descendants of Mr. Antropis's young ward. Only by a special personal interest in the matter, and with a sense of risk to an heirloom, I am permitted to make the manuscript for this edition. Undoubtedly, as R.A., Mr. Antropis dressed the mystic significancies of the cards in the book's Tavola in English less blunt and uncultivated than they came to his ears from the lips of the dying George. But that he took no other liberties of the least consequence is pretty certain. He respected the supernatural here, as in his grave brochure on the Cock Lane ghost, which spectre, alas, I mightily took him in. And, by the way, the reader will please observe in his pages here following that though the method of building and so of forming the square and of reducing it seems at first glance bothersome and complicated, it is only a childishly easy performance in the way of making a square of 7 rows of 7 cards, and then of making the rows only 3 cards deep at most. Crazy superstition and the aim at mummery have added the details of process that seem tedious, and really they are not ineffective in a drawing room. What we read of thus as carefully put together, conscientious, printed as a thing to be taken with seriousness, in its author's time may in our social day serve a lighter end, and entertain the parlor, rather than all the boudoir. With this intent, as well as in offering something of a literary curio, the present editor assists it toward the glimpses of not the moon, but the electric chandelier, and its 19th century sponsor hopes that many curious and pleasant fortunes may be read by it, and that in its pages the ominous spade, the mischief-working influencing card, the stern master card, the evil female or male enemy, and the vain and avaricious man, who must be ever indeed a terrible combination to endure, may not be frequently encountered. In any case, that along with many other troubles and trials, such unpleasant meetings may not come outside the vagaries of a pack of cards. E. Irenaeus, Stevenson, New York, 1897. Let's see it's pointless to get into that now. There's only 63 pages. I'll stop here. Goodbye.